This is Nightline.
Good evening. Labor has revealed its election tax platform, promising rebates for education expenses as well as tax cuts that by and large match the government's offer. But high income earners won't be getting tax relief if Labor wins. Their reductions will be put on hold with the money spent on health.
Having unveiled the government's $34 billion tax plan on day one of the campaign, John Howard looked relaxed and comfortable as he opened a coffee factory in Sydney's inner west and sampled the product.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Magnifico.
But Kevin Rudd, due to meet the Prime Minister in an election debate on Sunday, and with two opinion polls this morning showing Labor's lead narrowing, couldn't afford to relax. He had to get his tax policy out too.
What Australia needs is a tax reform which extends a helping hand to working families, but also helps build the nation.
The Labor leader said he'd match all the tax cuts offered by the government for people earning up to $180,000 a year, but he had one rabbit to pull out of his hat.
Labor will introduce a 50% education tax refund for working families for their investment in their kids' education.
The rebate would cover spending on laptops, home computers, printers, home internet connection, education software and textbooks. Parents receiving Family Tax Benefit A who outlaid up to $750 a year for primary school children and $1,500 for high school kids would get back half.
This is the toolbox of the 21st century.
The new tax refund would cost $2.3 billion and benefit two-thirds of Australian children, Mr Rudd said. It would be paid for by deferring tax cuts for high-income earners on more than $180,000. This would also finance a $400 million fund to help a Labor government drive down elective surgery waiting lists in hospitals across the nation. In another initiative, Mr Rudd said a Labor government would aim to reduce the number of personal income tax rates from 4 to 3, 15%, 30% and 40% within 6 years. A scornful Peter Costello, claiming Mr Rudd had adopted 91.5% of the government's tax policy, compared the Labor leader with a school student.
If he'd have brought his exam paper in after copying 91.5% of the answers from the student sitting next to him, he would have got an F for fail.
And the Treasurer criticised the proposed education tax refund for not covering school fees. Laurie Oakes for Nightline.
West Australian police have been forced to back down, dropping their drug possession charge against AFL star Ben Cousins. His lawyer says the 29-year-old is now considering legal action.
7 hours after Ben Cousins' highly publicised arrest in Northbridge on Tuesday, police announced they'd laid 2 drug-related charges against the football star. But today, another bombshell. The charge of possessing a prohibited drug dropped.
I don't think it's a police bungle. I think it's just a matter of interpretation.
Police didn't realise that to charge Ben Cousins with possessing the sedative diazepam without a prescription, the drug needed to be in liquid form. The diazepam Cousins was carrying was in tablet form. Ben Cousins' lawyer, Shane Brennan, says he knew the police were in the wrong.
I just think it's outrageous.
Cousins' second charge, refusing to take part in a police drug assessment, stands, and Mr Brennan expects that matter will go to trial next year. Police are also still investigating who owns the range of other prescription drugs found in the footballer's car, including the highly addictive and potent painkiller OxyContin, alprazolam, which has a similar sedative effect to Valium, and the anti-impotence drug Viagra. OxyContin's also known as hillbilly heroin because it's used as a substitute by drug addicts when they're unable to get heroin. It's a prohibited and highly controlled drug because it's so addictive. A $20 note with traces of ecstasy and cocaine was also found on one of the female passengers of Cousins' car. She's denied it's hers. Police are refusing to take any responsibility for the profound effect the charges had on Cousins. His career with the Eagles is over, and he may never play AFL football again.
We may have made a mistake. We've not made any comment in relation to this matter concerning Ben Cousins.
And no change of heart today from the Eagles over Cousins' sacking.
The decision that we've taken and the events of the last 24 hours are due to an accumulation of events. They are not purely based on what happened the other day. I mean, we're really pleased with this for Ben and his family, but it doesn't change anything with respect to the club or I'm sure what Ben will do.
But the club and police certainly haven't heard the last of it, with Cousins now considering legal action.
Certainly, I would be advising my clients to look at these issues.
Alicia Kennedy, reporting for Nightline.
Police say the boy, whose body was found in a suitcase floating in a Sydney pond, may have been as young as 2. His death has had a profound effect on locals in the southwestern suburb of Ambarvale.
In this quiet part of Sydney, a community bonds in the face of a terrible crime.
I've lived here for 17 years, and something like this happens here, it's heartbreaking.
Throughout the day, locals steadily added to a makeshift shrine beneath the crime scene tape. They don't know who this little boy is, but his discovery has touched them enormously.
I took my grandson to the shopping centre yesterday and I just couldn't let go his hand. I was nervous and scared, you know.
As the investigation goes on, some residents are offering police the power of prayer.
So I thought, whatever's hidden here today, God knows, and he can help the police to find out what that is.
The local minister says many of his followers just can't fathom why this has happened.
Just that lack of comprehension, how people can act that way.
Police have made some progress in their efforts to establishing the boy's identity. Following an autopsy, they've narrowed down his age to between 2 and 4 years old. But that presents a hurdle. Such a young age eliminates any hope of education or dental records.
It's extremely frustrating. It hampers the progress in the investigation.
This afternoon, divers finished their meticulous search of the pond. While scouring the bed, they found a sign, but no important signs. Over the years, all sorts of things have been dumped in the pond, but no one can get over the fact a little boy's body has also been dumped here.
When you've got 18 grandchildren, can you imagine how you'd feel if it was one of your own?
Simon Boda reporting for Nightline.
There was a lot of nasty planning circulating through the mind of Shirley Withers as she went about killing her millionaire partner with an injection of heroin. The Melbourne mother of 2 recruited 2 drug addicts to help her and then plotted to kill them as well to keep them quiet. Withers will now pay the price, sentenced to 26 years jail.
Shirley Withers was described as intelligent, resourceful and purposeful, her crime beyond imagination. She murdered millionaire Peter Shellard in his Caulfield mansion when she was living with him in 2005. The Supreme Court heard Mr Shellard's death was horrific. Hit twice in the head, then injected with heroin by Withers and 2 drug addicts who she'd recruited to help her. He was awakened by people attempting to handcuff his wrists, bind his feet and place a pillow over his head. The horror he must have experienced is impossible for the rest of us to fully comprehend. He put up more of a fight than the trio expected, but they subdued him, the court heard. Withers told the drug addicts her aim was to force Mr Shellard to sign over ownership of his house, but he died within minutes of the attack. After Mr Shellard's death, Withers proposed to have her accomplices murdered. She had discussions with an undercover officer who was involved in a police sting and even paid him some money to do the job. This added 6 years to her jail sentence. In this, her motives were clear, Justice David Harper said. You were afraid they would talk. The intended victims, Sophia Stupas and Stan Kalinikos, have already been sentenced to 6 years jail after pleading guilty to manslaughter. 41-year-old Withers will serve 18 years before she's eligible for parole. Mr Shellard's family were too distraught to comment on the sentencing. Paul Kennedy for Nightline.
The return from exile of former Pakistani leader Benazir Bhutto started out a carnival of flags and fevered support from the thousands of supporters who flooded the streets of Karachi. But politics in Pakistan can be a bloody business, and the street parade was shattered by a suicide bomb attack that left at least 130 people dead and hundreds more wounded.
Benazir Bhutto had been home for just 12 hours when the attempt was made on her life. With thousands applauding her motorcade, a suicide car bomber triggered 2 explosions, sending the crowd scrambling. It was a devastating scene as people rushed to find survivors. For all her vast support, Bhutto has many enemies, fundamentalists who despise a woman of such high profile, and more crucially, a politician who is seen as pro-American.
Some of the people had issued a warning that they will meet her, they will welcome her with the suicide bombers.
Bhutto was travelling in a reinforced truck. Had she been on top, as she was for most of the day during a tumultuous welcome home procession, she could have been injured or killed. The vehicle was left scorched and damaged, but a banner reading "Long Live Bhutto" was untouched. These pictures show her emerging unharmed to be taken to a safe house. Earlier, the former Prime Minister had flown in, ending an 8-year self-imposed exile. She tearfully paused on the bottom step before setting foot back on home soil. Both her terms in office ended under a corruption cloud, but she's still hugely popular and has done a deal with President Pervez Musharraf to scrap fraud charges and contest elections in January. Now her militant Muslim enemies have made their first strike and they're unlikely to abandon their violent campaign. James Talia for Nightline.
Maldivian trainer Mark Kavanagh admits he's worried about his horse coping over 2,400 metres in tomorrow's Caulfield Cup. Kavanagh's doubts haven't put off punters though, with Maldivian likely to start the hottest favourite in more than 40 years to win the $2.5 million Classic.
Horses have been racing for this Cup since 1879, but history seems against this year's favourite. The Mark Kavanagh-trained Maldivian is tipped to be the shortest prize favourite since 1966. Kavanagh keen to defy history.
Well, he's in top condition. We hope he can run 2,400 metres, and I hope the hype around him's right.
80 years old next month, Bart Cummings' Mount Sirmion is an out-of-form 100-to-1 shot.
I agree. We should be 200-to-1.
Let's elope back in 1991, the last of the sharp-witted veterans' record 6 Caulfield Cups.
6 so far, Keith.
6 so far, OK.
You never say die until you're dead.
All right. Beautiful one day, perfect for petrol heads the next, as the Gold Coast gasses up for this weekend's Indy. Plenty of hits during practice for the V8 supercars, and Mark Scaife did not miss Rick Kelly. Champ Car Series leader Sebastian Bourdais also came to grief. Australian Will Power second fastest for the opening qualifying session, but furious with a slower driver.
On my last lap, Dornbos just backed right out of it for no reason and totally screwed me.
Considering the tourist strip's distractions, expect more panel damage come the weekend. Andrew McKinlay for Nightline.
Stay with us, Nightline's finance and weather coming up. Plus, we salute the life of a movie great.
Shall we dance? 1, 2, 3, and on a bright cloud of music shall we fly?
Nightline's finance news now, and the Australian market lost most of yesterday's gains. The ASX 200 down close to 1% to 6,706. From CommSec, Tom Petrovsky joins us and take us through the big movers. Tom?
Well, Allison, there was a lot of red around today. Every sector finished in negative territory, but it was really the bank and mining stocks that contributed most to the day's falls. Bank stocks, because of the concerns in the US about the state of their financial sector, the housing market still having a big impact there. Today, the St George Group was the worst of the big five. It was down by about 3%. And overnight, we also saw the price of copper fall to its lowest level in about 4 weeks. So that plagued the mining stocks, and Rio Tinto was down by about 3%. But the big bolter on the day in a positive direction was the AWB. They upgraded their profit forecast thanks to a surging wheat price, and that had the shares up by about 20% today.
And Tom, how's Wall Street shaping?
Well, the big issue for Wall Street tonight, Allison, will be the price of oil. In the electronics session overnight, it breached the $90 mark, and that's going to have to be a pretty big hurdle psychologically for investors to have to deal with. There's still big problems in relation to the US housing market. We've seen that as a constant theme over the course of this week. So if the oil price stays in check, then the markets there will stand a better chance of finishing in positive territory. But we're not seeing any strong trend at this early stage of the session.
And finally, just quickly, the Aussie dollar, gold and oil.
Not much movement for the Aussie dollar at the minute. It's trading at 89.7 US cents, and gold's a little bit firmer, trading just short of 769 US dollars per ounce. And as I said, oil at the moment behaving itself. It's off its peaks, trading at $89.75 US per barrel in New York.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. And now a quick look at the weekend weather, and a fine Saturday for most of the country. A maximum of 26 for Brisbane, Sydney 23, Melbourne 25, hot and 32 in Adelaide, a few showers for Perth and 21 degrees, and afternoon rain and 34 in Darwin. And finally, the curtain has come down on the life of one of the great ladies of film, Deborah Kerr, who's died aged 86. She starred in scores of movies, but will be most fondly remembered for her performance in two of Hollywood's most famous scenes.
She appeared in nearly 50 films, but it was a few words in the hit movie The King and I that made Deborah Kerr a star to remember.
Shall we dance?
In the 50s, she was one of the most famous British actresses to make it in Hollywood, but was always happy to admit that her singing voice wasn't really up to scratch, so she mimed the song.
Shall we dance? Shall we dance? Shall we dance?
Before playing the prim school teacher, she set the screen on fire in 1953, Rolling in the Waves with Burt Lancaster in the wartime drama From Here to Eternity.
I never knew it could be like this.
Scottish-born Kerr also starred with Robert Mitchum in the Australian picture The Sundowners.
You mean like some have 6 pubs and others have a dozen?
She was nominated for an Oscar 6 times, eventually being awarded an honorary Oscar in 1994. Joey Bishop, another famous face, died today at 89. He was the last surviving member of the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra's celebrated group of buddies from the 1960s. The stand-up comedian, movie and TV star was 89. In Hollywood, Robert Penfold reporting for Nightline.
And that's Nightline for this Friday. I'm Allison Langdon. On behalf of everyone here, have a great weekend. Good night.